call its next witness, please?
The applicant would call James Doherty.
Oh, I forgot. So happy to get up.
I'm going to be asking questions. Can you simply up step off my mic? I can run.
Good afternoon, Mr. Doherty. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Good afternoon. Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the record?
James Doherty, James Doherty.
Did you provide written testimony in connection with this proceeding
Yes, I did.
on behalf of the applicant?
Yes.
Do you have a copy in front of you?
Yes, I do.
Did you sign that testimony under oath?
Yes, I did.
And do you adopt your written testimony for the purpose of entering it as testimony in this proceeding today?
Yes, I did.
Mr. Doherty is available for cross-examination.
Good afternoon, Mr. Doherty. I'm Rebecca Lacey. I represent the Weymouth Conservation Commission in this proceeding.
Hello?
So I'd like to discuss the testimony that you just adopted. That testimony states that you have taken over from Kelly Race as the LSP of record for the MCP response actions being carried out by Algonquin at 6 and 50 Bridge Street in Weymouth, correct?
Yeah, I'm the LSP acting on the site. I'm not technically an LSP of record. You don't become an LSP of record until you make a formal submission under the MCP, which we've not done yet. But I am acting as the LSP.
I believe that the notice of audit findings that DEP issued,
Have my name on it.
yes. Before you took over your current roles, can we call you the lead LSP for the site?
Sure. You can call me the LSP of record. That's fine. It's a shorthand.
Okay. Before you took over as the LSP of record, had you been involved with the MCP response actions at this site?
Yes. One of the areas of expertise is, my areas of expertise is El Napo, light non-aqueous phase liquid migration, and I was involved in that component of the project.
Was that the only component of the project that you have been involved in before you took over from Ms. Race?
I also did some review, some document review and things like that.
Did you contribute to the permanent solution with conditions statement for the site submitted by Algonquin in December 2018, which you referenced throughout your testimony?
I reviewed it. I was a senior technical reviewer on it.
Okay.
And I think I might have worked on an appendix as well.
Okay. So you were the senior technical reviewer. Would you say that you agreed with all of the analyses and conclusions set forth in that final permanent solution with conditions statement?
I would say I agree with, I don't know, every single one of them, but I agree with the general approach and the general conclusions there, yes. There's a lot of conclusions and assertions. I can't say I agree with every single one unequivocally. Not that I can cite any specific ones, I just don't want to commit to that.
Okay. Okay, you don't remember any specific aspect of that document. Sorry, let me rephrase that. Is it fair to say that you can't specifically right now point to or remember any analysis or conclusion from the permanent solution statement that you disagreed with?
Correct.
Fair to say?
Yes.
Okay, so Exhibit 2 to your testimony is DEP's Notice of Audit Findings, Notice of Noncompliance, issued on April 16th, 2019. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that document requires Algonquin to take certain actions by July 19th, 2019, correct?
Yes, it does.
And you're the LSP responsible for Algonquin's response to the notice of audit findings, notice of noncompliance, correct?
Yes.
So can you describe, kind of big picture, what additional work Algonquin is doing to respond to the notice of audit findings, notice of noncompliance in terms of sampling and reanalysis?
Objection. I think at the beginning of the hearing, we established that the scope of the hearing would be limited to the testimony that was before the hearing officer today. I think ongoing investigation generally is outside that scope.
And once again, as I stated before, I disagree with that characterization. I think that one of the ways in which the notice of audit findings is relevant is the fact that it requires additional sampling and, has other implications for the disposal site boundaries and so forth. I think that is fair game for Mr. Doherty's cross-examination.
I think that it's, as I said at the beginning, this hearing is not about the 21E response actions. The NOAF requires certain things, but I think his testimony doesn't speak to what the NOAF requires. He talks about the LNAP mobility and the OHM in fill at the proposed infiltration basin. So what we're really focusing in terms of the issues in this appeal has to do with the stormwater basin, not the scope of the 21A response actions. So if you can ask a question with regard to historic fill, LNAPL mobility, the stormwater infiltration basin design, that's within the scope of his testimony. But the scope of the 21E response actions being managed by the Bureau of Wayside Cleanup are outside the scope of this proceeding.
Understood. Mr. Doherty, as Madam Presiding Officer, the thrust of the questions that I'm going to start to ask have to do with the infiltration basin and the stormwater management. So I just want to state that at the outset. That's where I'm going. Mr. Doherty, as part of its work in response to the notice of audit findings, notice of noncompliance, will Algonquin be taking additional soil or groundwater samples for arsenic in the general vicinity of the proposed infiltration basin?
Yes.
And has that sampling been carried out already?
So field work is ongoing.
Okay. Do you anticipate that, well, okay, is it fair to say that the notice of audit findings states that the fill at the proposed compressor station site, let me start again. Is it fair to say that the notice of audit findings states that the fill located at 6 and 50 Bridge Street cannot be considered historic fill under the MCP?
It identifies two objections to the classification of the material as historic fill. Those objections are specifically that they argue that it was originated from the operation of the coal plant, generation of electricity, and therefore it's an industrial waste. And the other one, I believe, is that it
Do you want to refer him to a paragraph maybe in the document?
talking about the notice of audit findings, which is an exhibit to his
Yep.
testimony. So
Can you point to a paragraph with this, because it's so we can, you're looking at page 2.
Yeah, page 2 of the
yeah, the second
notice of
paragraph,
non-compliant.
sorry, the second
Yeah,
paragraph. of
given
page
the originating from activities at the location, it cannot be considered historic fill, see items D and F in the definition. And one of them is that it originated on site, and the other item is that it is the result of an industrial process. Those are the two objections that the DEP has identified as why this material can't be considered historic fill.
And the next sentence says, as such, the nature and extent of metals in the soil and groundwater attributable to the fill must be assessed and considered when conducting the risk characterization, correct?
If there's always an opportunity in the MCP to have technical justification for conducting response actions and conducting analyses, and if it's possible to identify information to address those objections that the DEP has at some or across the whole site, then those arguments can be made more specifically. The way I read this is that the permanent solution statement did not adequately make the case that those two requirements of the historic field definition have been met. If we can make the case that they've been met, then we're certainly within the realm of DEP to make that case.
Okay, if you could look at page 3 of the notice of audit findings, notice of non-compliance. There's a section that with a heading, description and deadlines of action to be taken. Do you see that?
Yes.
And one of the things listed under there, 1A subbullet III, states that if the risk characterization using the data for metals in soil and groundwater, extent of LMAPL, and the concentration of petroleum hydrocarbons determined for the shallow samples support a conclusion of no significant risk, then Algonquin should submit a revised permanent solution statement with conditions and a corrected AUL. Did I state that accurately?
That's what it says.
Or the alternative, my understanding is if the new risk characterization does not support a conclusion of no significant risk, then 1B states that you would have to retract the existing permanent solution with condition statement, correct?
No, we could amend it or terminate it and refile the AUL. We don't have to terminate the permanent solution condition. We could refile it, the existing one. But it hinges on the no significant risk determination.
And so do you, as the LSP, do you intend to, am I understanding correctly that DEP has ordered Algonquin to do a new risk characterization that evaluates the risk from arsenic, among other things? Is that accurate?
Objection. I think this is outside the scope and getting into the risk characterization.
This is the heart of why this is important. I mean,
He can answer that.
Well, once again, it hinges on the question of whether we feel we have sufficient technical justification to argue that the material is historic. Some or all the material is historic fill.
so am I understanding correctly that rather than submitting a new risk characterization, Algonquin intends to submit a technical justification to support classifying the fill as historic fill?
We're still out in the
Objection.
field.
I think this is getting into the risk
Yeah,
characterization.
sustained. I think that it's the same issue with Mr. Preston. I think that Mr. Doherty's testified that about the technical justification option that's available. And the inference that I'm drawing is that that's where Algonquin's going with this. They're going to try and technically justify that the site is historic fill, which is standard DEP practice in 21. That if someone gets a NOAF, NOM, and the recipient disagrees, they can take their shot at making a technical justification. Department doesn't have to agree, but it's a standard practice for the recipient of something like this after a level 3 audit, particularly on the permanent solution.
I don't read submitting a technical justification as one of the options that are listed in pages 3 to 4 regarding the description and deadlines of actions to be taken. It seems like DEP is ordering you to do a new risk characterization, and that if you don't do that by the deadline specified, a penalty may be assessed.
Same objection.
Sustained. I think if you read 1A2, it says the need for sampling and analyzing surface water and sediments is obviated by technical justification. So I think that the option exists for them to avoid that and avoid redoing the risk characterization.
Well, that's just sampling and surface water and sediment though, right? I mean, I think that redoing the risk characterization to evaluate the risk of arsenic in soil, I think is not optional.
You can ask them.
Objection, same objection. Beyond this one.
Well, I think it gets to the question with regard to infiltration through the contaminated soil, and that's kind of why we're here. So you can answer that.
Well, can I hear the
Yeah,
question
could
back?
you ask the question?
I read the notice of audit findings to require redoing the risk characterization to evaluate the risk of exposure to the existing concentrations of arsenic in soil at the site.
Where do you read that?
So it's a combination of on page 2, second paragraph, the statement that we already went over about historic fill, and it says, the nature and extent of metals in the soil and groundwater attributable to the fill must be assessed and considered when conducting the risk characterization. And then under the description and deadlines of actions to be taken, it says, if the risk characterization using the data for metals in soil and groundwater, and so blah, 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 supports a conclusion of no significant risk, then you can submit a revised permanent solution statement. If not, then you have to retract the existing permanent solution statement and continue with comprehensive response actions. Do you disagree with my reading of those requirements?
The key is the risk characterization. As you know, historic fill is excluded from the risk characterization.
Okay, so you don't read this as ordering you to do a risk characterization for arsenic?
We need to evaluate the nature of the fill and to address the DEP's concerns to their satisfaction. If we can't do that, then this would including it would be what we would have to do. But it doesn't preclude making a case for a historical fill out there. I don't read it that way. I don't read it that way at all.
Is it fair to say that if DEP does not budge from its position that the fill is not historic fill, is it fair to say that the boundary for the disposal site would then extend probably to encompass most of the 6 and 50 Bridge Street property?
No, it doesn't. By necessity, it does not mean that. It would encompass the entirety of the property, no.
Isn't it the case that arsenic has been found above S2 standards throughout the property?
It is, but that case The only portion of the property that's been studied is what I call the area within the former bermed area around the underground, above-ground storage tank. And you, I think you're trying to include the entire property, entire piece of parcel owned by Enbridge.
Well, let me ask you a more specific question. Would you agree that, again, if DEP does not budge from its position that the fill is not historic fill, would you agree that the area of the proposed infiltration basin would likely be considered within the boundaries of the disposal site, based on concentrations of arsenic in that area?
Like I said, we're still evaluating the data. We're still reevaluating the data. We've done investigations out there, so we can't really say that we haven't collected additional information that supports the argument that it is in fact historic fill.
Right, but I'm asking you to consider the possibility, because again, it's relevant to this proceeding, and so I think it's worth talking about right now. If DEP sticks to its determination that the fill is not historic fill, isn't it the case that then the boundary of the disposal site would have to include the area of the proposed infiltration basin, because arsenic has been found above S2 standards in that area?
Within the area, formerly burned area, I would say that's likely, that's reasonable to assume in that hypothetical.
I'm not clear about the burned area, so can we just talk about specifically the area of the proposed infiltration basin?
The area, yes, that would include the area of the proposed.
Okay, would be within the boundary of the disposal site in this hypothetical scenario?
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Doherty, in that scenario, would it be possible that the ultimate resolution of the MCP response action would include an AUL prohibiting stormwater infiltration in the area where the infiltration basin is currently proposed?
I don't see that as necessary. I mean, the soil conditions in the area of the infiltration were evaluated as part of the site investigations previously. Leachability studies were evaluated, soil samples were collected. There was a range of parameters and information that was collected during the site investigations specifically to address those concerns.
Okay, so let's talk about that then. Let's turn to paragraph 16 in your testimony. So paragraph 16 and 17 of your testimony describe the evaluation of potential leachability of arsenic, correct?
Yes.
And how many samples was that evaluation based on?
I believe a total of 5 SPLP samples.
Okay, and that was, and in your view as an LSP, did those 5 SPLP samples provide sufficient data for a complete evaluation of the potential leachability of arsenic?
They indicate a consistent level of leachability of the soils in the area of the infiltration basin. The results are consistent, internally consistent, and consistent with the observations of groundwater data as well. So it's both theoretically consistent and also consistent based on field data.
Okay, let's look at Exhibit 5 of your testimony. This is your analysis of the results of the SPLP procedure, correct?
Yes,
And this just looks at arsenic in 2 samples, correct?
correct.
And is it fair to say that you used, is it fair to say that in these calculations, you used the results of synthetic precipitation, leaching procedure, testing of soil to predict potential leaching of arsenic into groundwater due to stormwater infiltration at the site?
Yes,
And you did that by using the known arsenic concentration in a soil sample and the result of the SPLP test of soil from that same boring to determine a predicted partition coefficient for arsenic from soil to groundwater, right?
that's correct.
And for this sample B202 on the left here, the predicted partition coefficient was 806, KD was 860 liters per kilogram, correct?
Yes,
And the arsenic concentration in that soil sample was 4.4 milligrams per kilogram, correct?
that's correct.
Now, arsenic was found in soils in the vicinity of the infiltration basin at higher levels than 4.4, right?
Yes, 203 is an example of that. This sample to the right of that is an example of a higher, 10 times higher concentration, arsenic concentration.
And that predicted partition coefficient is quite different, right? I mean, it's an order of magnitude different from the other predicted partition coefficient from the other sample?
Yes, it is.
Can you use either of those partition coefficients to predict? I mean, is it fair to say that arsenic concentrations in soil at the site historically have been detected over 200 milligrams per kilogram, correct?
I've seen that data, and I'm not sure I can really accept that data. That's for the 1992 data you're talking about, HML?
I was just talking about data that was summarized in the permanent solution statements, but we can look at.
I mean, in the table 1, exhibit 4 shows the arsenic analyses in the area of the infiltration basin.
Okay, so I guess my question is, so arsenic was detected as high as 54 milligrams per kilogram.
Yes.
That
That's
looks like
what's
the
in.
highest of these. This is only about 10 samples, so.
The samples in the area of concern.
Yep. Okay, so arsenic was detected in those samples as high as 54 milligrams per kilogram. If you applied the partition coefficient of 860 liters per kilogram to that number, what would be the predicted concentration of arsenic in groundwater?
Probably, I don't know, it's 54 versus 46, so it would be.
Oh, no, I'm talking about if you use the 4.4, the partition coefficient on the left of 860 liters per kilogram.
Right.
If you extrapolated based on that partition coefficient, what would be your prediction of arsenic leaching in a soil that had 54 milligrams per kilogram of arsenic?
Well, I think we have a range here. You can't just pick this one. I mean, we're showing a range, and the results in terms of the predicted leachate concentration are similar. And the predicted leachate concentrations are consistent with what we observe in the groundwater out there. 5 milligrams, 5 micrograms per liter is consistently observed in the groundwater, which is predicted by the leachate concentration out of 202 and non-detect, essentially 0.009 milligrams per liter is below detection limit, and that's also observed in the groundwater in that area. So These are consistent with what we see in the measured groundwater data.
When you say consistently, how many groundwater samples are you talking about, over what time frame?
For what was presented in this document, for the permanent solution statement, it was just, I think, 5 samples. But they were collected across the entire site, and they're very consistent in terms of the measured arsenic concentrations.
They were all collected on the same day, correct?
They were all collected on the same day. There's other historical data that's been collected out there in the 1990s, a couple rounds, as part of a permanent solution that ABB did, and they didn't detect any arsenic in the groundwater.
Are you satisfied that that's significant, that's sufficient data on arsenic in groundwater?
I think it is representative. I would expect that we would collect additional groundwater data as part of our response, as part of our additional investigations.
And that'll be available by July 19th?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. What do you anticipate filing by July 19th?
Objection.
We, yeah,
That's beyond
that would be up to.
That's the standard.
And is it your testimony that the proposed compressor station project stormwater management complies with the Mass DEP stormwater standards?
I wouldn't say that I'm an expert in stormwater standards. I did listen to the previous testimony, and your concern was the standard seemed to be, what was it, can't
Cause or contribute
cause or
to
contribute.
groundwater contamination?
In my mind, I think you would say you can't make things worse. And this is predicted leachate concentrations are pretty much what we see out there.
But isn't it the case that infiltrating stormwater in the area where it's proposed to be infiltrated has the potential to mobilize arsenic from groundwater that would not have been mobilized into groundwater if the infiltration basin weren't put there?
That makes-
Objection. Is there a paragraph in his testimony that you're asking him about?
Yeah, is there? That's, I think we need to focus on that. And I also want to give you the 30-minute one.
Yes. I mean, he testifies. So, in paragraph 24 of your testimony, you say, in my professional opinion, the proposed stormwater recharge into the infiltration basin will not cause or contribute to groundwater contamination, correct? Does that mean that your testimony is that the proposed stormwater recharge into the infiltration basin will not mobilize any arsenic from soil into groundwater?
No, I predicted there's arsenic being mobilized at a level that's consistent with what's observed out there currently. You know, precipitation's been falling in this material for over 100 years. So it isn't like it's just going to be different all of a sudden after the infiltration basin's installed. It's been leached for, I don't know, not 100 years, but 80 or more years.
But isn't it the case that the infiltration basin will create a groundwater mound and therefore arsenic-containing soil will now be periodically saturated that has not periodically been saturated in the past? Isn't that true?
Two answers. One is it is periodically saturated due to rainfall. Anytime it rains, it's not necessarily saturated, but it is, water leaches through there every rainfall event that makes it to the water table. And two, that's what the SPLP was designed to evaluate.
But isn't it the case that the SPLP tests indicate that infiltrating stormwater through soil that is currently above the water table will in fact mobilize arsenic that over the last 100 years has not yet been mobilized and leached.
I don't see how it says that.
Mr. Doherty, is it possible that the additional evaluation that's being carried out in response to the notice of audit findings regarding arsenic, is it possible that that additional evaluation will change your opinion as to whether infiltration of stormwater will cause or contribute to groundwater contamination?
The objective of the additional investigations were to address the DEP's concerns. None of those concerns addressed leaching from the infiltration basin, so none of the investigations were really intended to address those, address that issue.
And am I correct that the permanent solution with conditions statement does not ever mention an infiltration basin as a potential future land use at the site?
I couldn't say that. I can't tell you that. I don't know.
You don't know whether or not the infiltration basin was evaluated as part of the permanent solution with conditions statement?
Whether it ever, what, you didn't say that, you said something else.
I'm wondering whether the permanent solution with conditions statement evaluated the proposed infiltration basin as a potential future use at this site.
The SPLP results was collected as part of those investigations, and those were really intended to address that concern.
But did the permanent solution statement with conditions statement tell DEP's Bureau of Waste Site Cleanup that Algonquin was intending to place a stormwater infiltration basin at this location?
I guess I would say, I can't say if it explicitly says that an infiltration basin is okay out there. I don't recall reading that. But the DEP did read the permanent solution with condition statements, and they did read, I believe, the other supporting documentation. So they don't seem to be concerned that this is an issue with regards to the infiltration basin. Although I can't speak for them.
So maybe, well, perhaps could you show me the place in the permanent solution condition statement where the infiltration basin is discussed?
No, I can't. I do know, like I said, the SPLP data was collected, I believe, in the area of the infiltration, specifically to address potential leachate from the infiltration basin. I think that
Right,
was
but
the objective.
could you show me a place where the permanent solution with condition statement tells the Bureau of Waste Site Cleanup
No, I
that
can't.
there's going to be an infiltration basin sited in this area?
Objection, asked and answered.
You know.
I would like to.
You can answer. Can you cite us?
I can't, no, I said I can't recall any specific citation in the PSSC that mentions the infiltration basin.
So in fact, the permanent solution with the condition statement does not mention the infiltration basin, correct?
Objection,
No, in fact.
mischaracterizes his testimony.
Sustained.
In DEP's audit, of the MCP response actions, did DEP specifically mention in any way the potential siting of an infiltration basin at this property?
I didn't see any reference to that.
So we have no evidence that the Bureau of Waste Site Cleanup staff have evaluated the potential siting of an infiltration basin at this location, correct?
Not that I'm aware of.
Sorry?
Not that I'm aware of.
I think I have no further questions.
Mr. Hayden,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
I have a series of pages from the permanent solution with condition statement report that I'd like to show the witness. I have copies from counsel and presiding officer.
Thank you.
Mr. Ronchild, if the witness could have the one, it's the same page. Thank you. Mr. Doherty, this is page 16 from volume 1 of the permanent solution with condition statement.
Okay.
In the second paragraph, the third and fourth lines from the bottom beginning historic fill appears. Do you see that?
Yes.
Would you read that sentence for us?
Historic fill appears to be the source of elevated concentrations of metals throughout the property, including those portions coincident with the disposal site.
Do you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I mean,
That's enough.
Yes.
I've got limited time, so I'm going to try to
Yes.
rifle through some of these questions. Mr. Doherty, next I'm showing you page 28 of volume 1 of the permanent solution with conditions statement. In the bottom paragraph, under soil, do you see the sentence in the fifth line that begins soil samples collected?
yes.
Would you read that sentence for us?
In addition, metals data from within the disposal site boundary were excluded from the risk characterization data set because the metals are representative of the historic fill and not associated with the number 2 fuel oil release. These samples and/or analyses excluded from the risk characterization set are highlighted in yellow on table 1 and appendix F1.
Do you agree with that sentence?
This is speaking about soil within the disposal site boundary as defined by the number 2 fuel oil release. Yes, that is accurate.
It's accurate that metals data was not included in the risk characterization, correct?
Actually, I shouldn't, I'm sorry, I shouldn't, I can't confirm that. I wasn't involved in the risk assessment at all. I shouldn't say that that's true. I mean, it says that, yes.
Okay. And you had some testimony earlier this afternoon about the potential for TRC to submit a technical justification to the department on the issue of whether the department's conclusion that there's no historic fill on the property is correct?
That's an option, yes,
Okay.
that's a possibility.
We don't know what's going to happen in the future, and we're not allowed to ask about it today. So if we take a snapshot of the record as of today, you agree the department's concluded there's no historic fill on this site, correct?
I agree that the department has concluded that, yes.
And that determination has not been challenged by TRC in the form of a technical justification as of June 4, 2019, correct?
As of this date, as of this moment, we have not done that.
Okay. So as of this date and this moment, the risk assessment is not compliant with the department's existing order, correct?
No, that's not correct, because we have until July 17th to respond to that order.
Which you haven't done yet. So I'm
Which
talking
we
about,
haven't done yet, but we are not required to do that, so we're not out of compliance for anything. We're in compliance with the requirements of the notice of NON.
so is it your testimony that this proceeding can't be closed until that decision is made?
No,
Objection.
Overruled.
no. I mean, I just went through a half-hour discussion about how the nature of the material, whether it's called historic fill, or whether it's called fill, or whether it's called ash, or whether it's called whatever you want to call it. We've done a thorough analysis and determined that the siting of the infiltration the basin will not impact will not make things worse.
But my question is, if the evidence in this proceeding closes today, then you have no technical justification that's been approved by the department concerning the classification of historic fill, correct?
We have but the argument whether it's historic fill or not has no real impact on the determination of whether a infiltration basin could be sited where it's proposed to be located. The name of it doesn't matter. It's the same material whether the DEP accepts it as historic fill or not. It's been evaluated and it's been characterized, and we've made our conclusions, and those won't change whatever you call it.
Thank you. Mr. Doherty, I'm showing you page 41 of volume 1 of the permanent solution with condition statement. Do you see in the paragraph entitled historic fill-related exposures,
Yes.
in the 6th line, sentence beginning in the future?
Yes.
Would you read that sentence for us, please?
In the future, there may be disturbance of soil associated with property development.
And could you read the following sentence?
Any such disturbance will be performed under a health and safety plan and groundwater and soil management plan to protect the health of workers and others in the vicinity of the property.
What does in the vicinity of the property mean?
The disturbance would be monitored to ensure that any intrusive activities would not create conditions that are in excess of risk-based or regulatory-based criteria.
I'm just focused on in the vicinity. What are the parameters of that statement?
Well, it would be outside of the boundary of the work area. How about that?
To include the public walkway?
Yes.
Can I just have a 30-second break off the record? I just have to test my blood sugar.
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Newton.
Oh, no apology necessary.
Some crunching, sorry.
Ready?
Yep.
Mr. Doherty, I'm showing you page 15 of volume 4 of the permanent solution with condition statement report. Do you see the question and response labeled 8B?
Yes.
For
And
clarification, is this part of a larger section? I think you said volume 4, is it?
it's part of the questions and answers that are contained within volume 4.
Okay. I just was, has the witness seen this?
It's part of his exhibits, right?
No. It's part of the applicant's memorandum. I think.
Okay. So, Mr. Doherty, have you reviewed the applicant's memorandum and exhibits in this proceeding?
The applicant's memorandum is, yeah, I think I've looked at that. I mean, this is from the public involvement plan, transcripts in response to questions posed by the public involvement plan group at the meeting.
And you were a senior technical reviewer on the permanent solution with condition statement report, correct?
Of the conditions, but not of these sections, none of the PIP stuff.
Well, you testified earlier that you were involved with the LNAPL, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so that's the focus of this question. Within 8B in the response, do you see on the 4th line the sentence stating under future conditions?
On the future conditions, yep.
Okay, and then after that sentence, there's a sentence that begins with the word LNAPL.
Yep.
Would you read that sentence beginning with LNAPL, please?
LNAPL and historic fill-related contamination were not evaluated in the risk assessment. However, there will be an activity and use limitation and conditions attached to this disposal site and property to maintain a condition of no significant risk as defined by the Massachusetts contingency plan during any future development activity.
Do you agree with that statement?
Yes. Insofar as LNAPL is not included in any risk assessment. It's not a, there's no risk standard for LNAPL, which is why they have the LNAPL guidance, and it's not explicitly included in the regs. I've had this discussion before with our risk assessment.
All I asked was if you agree with the statement.
Mm-hmm.
You do?
Yes.
Sorry. Mr. Doherty, I'm showing you section 4 from volume 1 of the permanent solution with conditions statement report. It's the risk characterization.
Yes?
Have you seen this before?
I have not reviewed it. I'm not a risk assessor, so this is not my area of expertise, so I did not review this section.
So you're the LSP, correct?
I am currently the LSP. I was not the LSP at the time this document was produced.
When did Mrs. Race retire?
I don't know, 6 months ago, something like that.
Your pre-filed direct testimony in paragraph 4 says she retired in 2018.
Okay,
Is that accurate?
sounds good to me.
Did you fact check it?
I fact-checked it at the time, yes.
And the final permanent solution with conditions statement report is dated December of 2018, correct?
I believe so. I mean, I'd have to look at it. I think it is, yeah.
I can show you the cover page if that helps.
Sure. Right, December 2018.
So you were the LSP of record by the time this final report was issued, correct?
No, as I mentioned before, I'm not the LSP of record until it until I submit a document as the LSP. I'm not the LSP of record.
Fair enough. Ms. Race had retired by the time the permanent solution with conditions statement report was issued, correct?
I'll have to look back. Where does it say that her date of retirement was?
Just says 2018 in paragraph 4
She
of your
retired
testimony.
2018, okay. She could have retired. My understanding is that she submitted this and then she retired. I certainly had no involvement with the submittal of this.
If I could turn your attention within the first paragraph of section 4 on page 27 of the permanent solution with conditions statement. Given that you are currently the LSP for the site, do you see the sentence, the second sentence that begins the risk characterization addresses?
Just to clarify, not the LSP of record at this point.
I didn't use of record, sir.
Okay, so I haven't assumed responsibility for this.
Is there anybody that has responsibility as the LSP for this site as of today's date?
I guess me, but I'm not the LSP of record. I don't think I officially have responsibility for this in terms of legal responsibility for it.
Is there somebody better situated to ask these questions of that's
No,
an LSP for the site?
no,
And that's since Ms. Race retired in December of 2018, correct?
correct.
So the second sentence of section 4 that begins with the risk characterization,
Right.
could you read that sentence for us?
The risk characterization addresses human and environmental receptors reasonably expected to be at and near the disposal site.
Do you agree with that sentence?
Objection. I think he's already testified that he was not part of this risk characterization portion of the permanent solutions, and I also think this is outside of the scope of this hearing, and now getting into risk characterization generally.
Sustained. If, Mr. Hayden, if you could bring us back to the stormwater question and the question of historic fill.
Sure. Mr. Doherty, if I could turn your attention to the third paragraph of section 4. In the sixth line, there's a sentence that begins historic fill constituents.
Mm-hmm.
Could you read that sentence for us?
Historic fill constituents have been excluded from the risk characterization because it has been demonstrated in section 3 that the historic fill present at the property meets the definition of anthropogenic background.
Do you agree with that sentence?
Objection. That question is related to risk characterization, not to stormwater.
Sustained.
Mr. Doherty, I'm showing you what page 55 of volume 1 of the permanent solution with conditions statement report. I believe this is the same section shown to Mr. Foss earlier this afternoon. Do you see the last paragraph above section 7 that begins with per 310 CMR 40?
Yes.
Could you read that sentence for us?
per 310 CMR 40.10131B, those portions of the property characterized by the presence of historic fill material as defined by the MCP 310 CMR 40.0006 are not required to be addressed by an AUL.
Do you agree with that sentence?
Objection, the question is still unrelated to the stormwater standards.
Well, I think not, because there was prior testimony with regard to excavation for the basin and the location of the basin and the language of the 80 well. So this is relevant to this question.
They are, I agree with it, but they are addressed in actually one of the previous paragraphs as part of the conditions, permanent solution with conditions. There are conditions placed on the historic fill material.
Not in the activity and use limitation, correct?
Correct.
And if the department's position on historic fill remains unchanged, then that is something that will have to be corrected in the activity and use limitation, correct?
Depending on the results of a risk assessment, that would be the determination of what needed to be, what follow-up needed to be done. It wouldn't have to necessarily be an AUL.
But some follow-up would have to be done.
If the DEP does not accept the historic fill designation, then that would change things, yes.
Have you
Change
had,
the risk assessment.
sorry,
It would change the risk assessment.
have you had conversations with the DEP about a potential challenge on the grounds of a technical justification to the non-classification of historic fill?
Objection, I think that's outside the scope.
You can answer it.
We've had discussions with the DEP in response to their notice of noncompliance and discussed the issues that they've identified.
With who specifically?
The Southeast Region staff, the audit team.
Anyone in particular?
The people on the notice of findings, and Gerard Martin. Mark Panani, and Deborah Marshall Hewitt.
And who's participated from TRC?
I did.
Anyone else?
That's it.
How many meetings have you had?
One.
When was it?
It was after we had a chance to digest this and set up the meeting. So probably a month maybe after we got this.
Mid-May?
I could confirm that, but say approximately a month after we received it.
If I could ask you a few questions on the notice of audit findings and notice of non-compliance while you have it in front of you, please. There's a notice that is 3 pages followed by the violation descriptions, correct?
It's called the notice of audit findings, notice of non-compliance is what it's
Sure.
called.
I just, let me ask you, I want to make sure we're looking at the same documents. I first, in this series of 7 pages, have a 3-page document that's got department letterhead dated April 16th, 2019, with a first heading stating reason for this notice.
Correct.
What do you refer to that document as?
I would call it the cover letter.
And then on page 4, we have a 4-page document that says notice of audit findings, notice of non-compliance.
Correct.
What do you call that?
I would call it the notice of audit findings, NOA and NOAF.
In your 27 years of experience, Mr. Doherty, how many notice of audit findings, notice of non-compliance documents have you received from the department?
One.
This is the only one?
This is the second one.
What was the other?
It was related to a release abatement measure in maybe 5 or 6 years ago.
Have anything to do with historic fill?
No.
I don't mean to interrupt, it's just that I've modified some pickup of family members already based on the first anticipated schedule. Now, I may need to leave for a few minutes to remodify since I think we've gone beyond the 25, 20 mark.
Yeah, I think with, we're supposed, the escalator is gonna shut down at 5:30, and it's 25 past. So, how much more do you have, Mr. Newman?
5 minutes?
Do you want to take a 30-second break?
Just very quick.
Okay, we'll take a 30-second break. We're off the record, right? Ms. Bellafiore? I have copies of the sign-in sheets for it. I have 5 copies, so you want one?
I appreciate that. Sure.
If anyone else wants them, I'll be up around the chair.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Doherty, turning your attention to the Notice of Audit Findings, Notice of Noncompliance, page 1. Under the section entitled Violation of 310 CMR 40.0904, do you see that?
Yes.
Would you read the first sentence underneath the heading?
An adequate characterization of the disposal site is a prerequisite to the characterization of risk of harm to health, safety, public welfare, and the environment. Although the appropriate type and amount of information required to complete a risk characterization will depend on the unique characteristics of a release site and/or disposal site.
Do you agree with that statement?
Yes.
And you agree that as of June 4, 2019, Algonquin is in violation of 310 CMR 40.0904?
That kind of hinges on the determination of the historic field determination, which is, in my mind, still an open question. So I wouldn't say that I'm in violation, but we are in a situation where we need additional information.
As of today's date, on today's record, in the absence of a technical justification having been submitted to the department, is it your testimony that Algonquin is not in violation of 310 CMR 40.0904?
Yes.
If I could turn your attention to page 3 of the Notice of Audit Findings, Notice of Noncompliance. You see section 2 entitled Violation of 310 CMR 40.1056.
Yes.
Would you read the bulleted paragraph for us, please?
According to 310 CMR 40.0006, a conceptual site model, quote, means a site-specific description of how contaminants entered the environment, how contaminants have been and may be transported within the environment, and routes of exposure to human environmental receptors that provides a dynamic framework for assessing site characteristics and risk identifying and addressing data gaps and managing uncertainty, eliminating or controlling contaminant sources, developing and conducting response action strategies, and evaluating whether those strategies have been effective in achieving desired endpoints. The CSM discussion in section 3 of the report did not contain all of the elements of this definition. You must provide a CSM figure and discuss all of the subjects listed above in your report.
Do you agree with that paragraph?
Objection. This is unrelated to the stormwater standards.
Sustained.
My response, Madam Presiding Officer, is this is the reason why we're here. This is the Notice of Audit Findings, Notice of Noncompliance. I've asked the witness to read the document. He testified in his pre-filed direct testimony of paragraph 6 that he reviewed the document It pertains specifically to the applicant's failure to comply with the conceptual site model as it pertains to exposure to human environmental receptors that provide a dynamic framework for assessing site characteristics and risk. Those site characteristics and risks and dynamic framework would include the stormwater management system. So I believe it's within the scope of our proceeding.
Okay, I will allow that question.
It's not explicitly discussing stormwater management here.
The question, sir, was just whether you agree with the paragraph.
That's the definition of a site-specific of a conceptual site model in 310.006. Yes, I agree that. The last sentence did not contain all of the elements of this definition. There may be one or two elements that are missing.
Do you agree that as of June 4, 2019, Algonquin is in violation of 310 CMR 40.1056?
In accordance with the notice of non-compliance, yes, DEP feels that that's the case.
I just have one more question, Ms. Rothschild. Mr. Doherty, I'm showing you page 51 of volume 1 of the permanent solution with conditions statement. I apologize, this is the entire section 6. So before you have pages 51 through 55. And if I could turn your attention to page 53. The last full heading and bullet point that states pursuant to 310 CMR 40.10562G.
Yes.
Would you read the bullet point for us?
The results of a feasibility evaluation conducted pursuant to 310 CMR 40.08601E, in turn pursuant to 310 CMR 40.1003, 5 through 7, demonstrated that achievement of background is not feasible.
Do you agree with that statement?
Yes.
Mr. Rothschild, those are all the questions I have.
Any redirect?
No redirect.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Doherty, for your excuse. Okay. We are concluded for today. The transcript will be filed with OADR. You have a time frame?
If we can talk to the court reporter and see, we were not planning to expedite unless,
You don't need to expedite. And so the closing briefs, supplemental closing briefs, if you care to file them, will be due 2 weeks from the date the transcript is filed with OADR. So whatever date that turns out to be, we'll start the clock. Any other questions? Okay. We are done and we are closed. Thank you all.
thank you.
Mr. Rothschild, while we have the parties here in the air permit proceeding, are we starting at 9 a.m. on Monday?
7:30.